So I invite you, Rachel Wagner here from Just Housing. You want to introduce yourself, Rachel, and tell us a little bit about yourself? Oh, you're on mute.
Richard Olson's on there.
How about that?
There you go.
Okay, sorry. I'm in an unfamiliar place. So thank you, everybody, for welcoming me here tonight. And I am a designer and energy analyst, some would say an energy geek, who has worked in the realm of housing and health and community impacts of that for some 25 years. I was the Just Housing part of a team of 3 who did the auditing and the reporting for 5 homes, working with my colleagues, Leah Carmaker and Randy Williams of Wilcon. Thanks.
Excellent. Welcome. And our other presenter is our Greater Minnesota Director for MNIPL. Bret, you want to say a little bit?
Yeah, hi everyone. Bret Pence, again with MNIPL. I'm our sole staff person from outside the Twin Cities Metro. I live and work in Duluth, and I am our kind of our regional northern staff person. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today with you, and we'll talk through heat pump helpers and a little bit of the history of that and kind of what we found. Looking forward to it.
Great. Well, I'll let you take it away, Bret. You can just let me know, advance the slides and take it away. Thanks.
Okay, sounds good. Please, I'm going to ask for folks' forgiveness on that. I am a very boring slide maker, but I promise I won't read from the slides for you. If I did put an image behind this, it would be some kind of superhero, because this is the origin story. So here's the origin story of how I think it's important that you realize how we got to this project. And how we got to it was MNIPL. One of the things we try to do is help faith communities and the communities, those faith communities and community groups live in, understand how to do practical projects to take action on climate change. And one of the things we were hearing in 2022 was from many of our partners in particularly Northeastern Minnesota about air source heat pumps. And they were curious about the products. They were curious about what contractors, they were curious that they could use or that they shouldn't use. They were curious about if it worked in a really cold place like Duluth, or I see we have lots of folks from Grand Marais on the call. So yeah, even up there. And I'll just remind folks to mute a little bit. Here I'm getting some feedback. And so one of the things reminded us of solar, the situation of solar in Duluth in 2014 when we started doing work up here, where it was a very unknown product. And one of the things we did at that point was to do a lot of outreach and education on that, to try and pull more contractors into this region, and then really amp up demand through kind of group buys. And we wondered if we could do the same thing. But we knew we weren't really in the spot to do that yet. And then in August of that year, the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, or Uncle Ira, as some people in the federal government used to call it, passed. And that was a bill, despite its name, which is really a climate action bill. It was a lot of carrots for climate action, incentives for climate action. And it was trying to do 3 things. It was basically saying, okay, we need to clean up electricity. We need to once we clean up electricity, we need to electrify everything and get it on the grid and get off of fossil fuels. And then we need to make sure people can take part in that. Next slide. Yeah, and so one big part of that electrify everything, one key technology are heat pumps. And heat pump, before we start talking about this study, I thought we should just say what a heat pump is. On the left picture is a furnace in my own basement, a gas furnace. That's burning a fuel to create heat and then distributing that heat around a house. You may have a boiler. You may have maybe electricity or propane or fuel oil or wood, but that's all a fuel that is being burned at that point, or is creating heat from that. Heat pumps don't do that. They move heat from one place to another. And an air source heat pump moves it from one air source place to another air place of another atmosphere, if you will. So you're either taking air from outside the house, you're finding the heat within that air, and you're transporting it into the heat into the house, into the air in your house, and warming it up, or you're doing the opposite, and you're moving the heat from that's latent in the air inside your house, and you're moving it outside to cool off your house. That is a heat pump. We are very familiar with this technology, all of us, even if we don't know it. You have an air conditioner, you have a refrigerator. Everyone has a refrigerator, and all those are heat pumps that just work in one direction. Think about those moving in two directions. And so these heat pumps are great in that they are extremely efficient because they're not burning fuel. They're just moving heat from one place to another. So where the gas furnace you might see on the left is a 95% efficient furnace, and its actual efficiency may be as low as 85%. The heat pump you see at my mother-in-law's house in Aiken County on the right-hand side is 3 or 4 times more efficient than that. So it's a key technology of this move to electrify everything. And air source heat pumps are focused on moving heat from one atmosphere to another atmosphere, if you will. Next slide. And there's just more about electrifying everything. Again, that key component of the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide. And of course, the Inflation Reduction Act provided a bunch of carrots, really, a bunch of incentives to do that. These are tax credits that are involved in that are also integral to heat pumps. And there are rebates as well that we'll talk about later that are also potential, that are coming for Minnesota that could also be applied to heat pumps. Next slide. So with all of that information, by 2023, we really wanted to understand heat pumps better. And we really wanted to get the information out there that these incentives were around. We have a fantastic volunteer network in Northeastern Minnesota. Lots of folks that are willing with information to try things out and become early adopters. So we asked them as they were talking to contractors, as they were exploring heat pumps in their own homes, what their experience was like. And it became clear to us that we probably, one thing we could do to help the situation is commit to running a sort of an educational webinar series about what we were finding out and offer the best, offer the public those partners, those experts we knew, and let them talk to them about air source heat pumps and how they could be applied in northern Minnesota. So we did that, and we committed to a 3-part webinar series. Rachel and Just Action was a key part of that series. We also had partners from CERTs, or Clean Energy Resource Teams, Fresh Energy, Equilibrium 3, and a contractor, heat pump contractor. So those are really great, and those are still on our website, and we've condensed all the resources from that into that website. Next slide. However, even as we were planning that, before we even started that, we knew that wasn't going to be sufficient. And the reason was that even when we were educating people and telling people, hey, what you need to do is get an energy audit, and then you need to, talk to a contractor. Even when people did all the right things, it was still extremely difficult, particularly in older homes and up here in northeastern Minnesota, to understand, what is the line? When is a heat pump appropriate or not? This is a very new technology that we're trying to integrate into an older home built with older technology in mind. So we knew we needed to go deep to really ask these questions about readiness. And thus we applied for a seed grant from the Clean Energy Resource Teams, or CERTs. That allowed us to kind of do a deep dive into these 5 older homes in Duluth. What we intended to find with this deep dive is to really figure out, again, this question of readiness, figure out maybe some of the processes that would be best to help people, understand readiness, record what we found, and then kind of see what emerged from that. And before we move on, I just want to say thank you to CERTs for allowing us to do that. They help subsidize these reports that Rachel will be talking about. They also help subsidize some of our time, our work in this project, that time of Rachel and myself and Leah. But also, I also want to thank the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation that helps pay for my salary. And they were directly involved in terms of understanding this project and wanting to support it. The McKnight Foundation, and then all the folks around the state that support MNIPL help support the work, this kind of work. Next slide. So thank you. So what did we do? You know, we had to find some people that were interested in doing this. We had some homeowners, and luckily we had a lot of people that attended those webinars that I had mentioned earlier. So this webinar series about heat pumps in the North Country. And so we had a lot of people that I could draw on, and we were looking for folks with older homes within the Duluth area that were interested in heat pumps, and you know, would have the ability to pay up front. Yes, they could get partially subsidized later, but they would be able to handle that, and also have some time to invest. And the other thing we knew is we needed some really great partners to figure this out. And Rachel is well known in Duluth. I would say she's one of the top green architects in the state. And I think she's an incredible, not only is she incredibly smart, but she's incredibly able to communicate what she knows. So we were really lucky that she wanted to partner on this and kind of doing these home performance reports. And then Randy Williams from Wilcon came on and delivered the audit, the testing of these homes, the air leakage testing, and the thermal imaging testing. And Randy is fantastic at that. So we were really lucky. Next slide. So then we started this process. We did find 5 homeowners and with homes from 20 to over 100 years old. We then, as we talked to the homeowners about what they really wanted, that morphed into scheduling interviews and conducting inspections and testing at those homes with visits. They were then given a report, by Rachel's team of folks over there. And then we followed that up with interviews, separate interviews, both on sort of following up on the report that they received, and then sort of a final exit interview to wrap everything up. Next slide. So we're going to move now into exactly, what that kind of testing condition was like, and Rachel's kind of going to walk you through that. So thanks so much, and Rachel, take it away.
Okay, great. Next slide. So as Bret said, the Just Housing team was conducting these audits. And so it was myself and Randy Williams, who you see in the photo on the left, and Leah Carmaker, who is also Just Housing staff on the right. And the 3 of us really worked as a team to assess, analyze, and write the reports for this. And so early on, we knew that process was going to be super important. And this theme of process before product is not new to our industry. It's real common and understandable to wish for a magic something, right? That is going to solve our housing, our climate, our energy problems. And so not that long ago, solar panels were the big one. And up here in the Northland, a lot of people were told, well, you can't do solar in such a cold, snowy climate. It won't work, but it does. We've heard similarly about heat pumps. We can't do heat pumps up here. They won't work. For a long time, that was true. In about the last 15 years or so, though, the technology has just gotten better and better and better. I'm not an engineer, so I can't speak about what it means to say inverter-driven technology and variable speed and variable volume capacity. But these technological advances have made it so that a variety of heat pump technologies can work in very cold sub-zero climates, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And as people have become more familiar with heat pump technologies and more interested in eliminating fossil fuels from their homes, for lots of reasons, this is where people want to go, and people are asking lots of questions. In new homes, it's pretty easy, and you're seeing a new home in the photo on the left. It's now, I would say, pretty easy to just add heat pumps, so to speak. And that's because if we are starting with the premise that the house is going to be a low energy home, which I'll get to in a moment, and all electric, we know how to balance the energy needs and loads of the home in such a way that a heat pump works. And an analogy you might want to think about is something like this. Even if solar panels were super inexpensive, we could not simply go to any house, 100-year-old home in Duluth, and say, we're going to make your home net zero by covering your roof with solar panels. And the reason we couldn't do that is because for a lot of homes, the energy requirement to keep the home operating is so great that the roof is too small to fit all the solar panels on it that we would need to meet the energy demand. But if we know ahead of time that that's the goal, we can tailor or engineer the house in such a way that absolutely we can meet all of the energy requirements of the home with a solar panel array that can fit on the roof, or even half the roof. So it's not so different to think about heat pumps in the same way. And that's what we set out to understand looking at older homes in this project. Next slide. So what did we do for each of these homes? We interviewed the homeowners to identify their priorities, their concerns. We conducted an energy audit. I'll talk a little bit about what that is. We analyzed at least 1 year of current energy consumption. That's all energy consumption. And for some of these homes, it was, electricity, propane, energy produced by solar panels, and a wood stove. So we get our energy from a variety of sources in our homes. And then we considered within the whole assessment of what the house needed, the potential applicability of a variety of heat pump technologies, including heat pump water heating, space heating, or cooling. Could it be used for an addition, an integration, or replacement for existing equipment? Next slide. So typically in a whole house assessment, we are looking to see, have prior reports been done? We ask to see them. We want to read what was done before us. We go to the site and we're there for several hours at least to really, really look closely at the enclosure, the construction assemblies of the house, talk to the homeowners. As I said, we ask for records for at least 1 year of energy use, and we ask for that before we've gone to the house so we can get a sense of how much energy they're using. We do a variety of diagnostics, not just testing the airtightness with a blower door, but we do combustion safety testing if there are combustion appliances. We do some analysis about the indoor air quality, environmental quality, and you're seeing a snapshot from an indoor environmental quality monitor on the left of the screen. We take all of our notes and photos and test results back to the office. We start to analyze and sort and have conversations around them. And we organize the information and our thoughts and our recommendations kind of according to health and safety concerns. We talk about the enclosure, which is like the shell of the house, and then the systems within the house. We analyze the information about how much energy the household is using, now within the context of talking to the homeowners and also being at the house and seeing what we saw. And from that, we generate hopefully some recommendations, an awful lot of considerations, and we almost always have a section at the end where we are making suggestions for further investigation or next steps, maybe explore before you make a decision about something. Next slide. So when we do an assessment, even if we are told that we're coming in just to talk about energy, the order matters. Houses are complex systems, and the things that go on in a house, the way they react to weather, storms, wind, the robustness of the enclosure, the durability of that house, how water, whether it takes on water or not, how much energy it's using, how the occupants live in the home. All of these, we call these systems, and they all interact with each other. And sometimes when you start to sort of touch on one of them, there are always impacts on the other systems. And part of our job is to anticipate what those interactions might be and try to avoid interactions that could compromise something in the home that could cause harm, first and foremost, to the occupants. And so the order of what we do, the order of what we look at, the order of what we test, and certainly the order of how we make our recommendations, what we're trying to address, matters. In homes that are burning fossil fuels, combustion safety is number one. Are the occupants going to be safe the way things are operating now? And if we are going to start to recommend changes, might we make things more fragile? Tied to that is the idea of ventilation. Occupants need fresh air, a steady supply. They need to get rid of pollutants. And we want to make sure that what is happening in the house now and what we might recommend addresses that ongoing need. We want to take care of water. You can see I haven't gotten to energy yet. Then we start to take care of energy. And to put it sort of in shortest terms, as one of my teachers taught me, anytime you're going in to work on existing homes or do something new, there is kind of a hierarchy. And if we're trying to be sort of environmentally sustainable, there's still a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is this. Number one, take care of the people. Number two, take care of the building. And number three, take care of the planet. So air sealing, insulation, and mechanical systems are some of the last things that we're going to consider as we make recommendations. And when we're considering them, we're looking at how air sealing, insulation, and a change of mechanical systems might impact and affect combustion safety, ventilation, indoor air quality, and moisture management in the home. Next slide. So we looked at 5 older homes, as Bret said. Some of them, or one of them, was more than 100 years old, and the newest was 20 years old. So it was a wide range. All 5 of these homes currently use fossil fuels, propane or natural gas. Next slide. So I'm going to just show you quickly from oldest to newest. And I'm not going to, like Bret, I'm not going to read everything on the slides. There was nothing super out of the ordinary with any of these homes. Some of them have had work done, like this one, a newer roof. They'd had quite a bit of insulation and air sealing done, some new windows. They had solar panels. 3 out of the 5 houses had solar panels on the roof. All of them had, I think it was 2 to 4 occupants. They were sort of average size. This was one of the larger ones. Next slide, please. Belmont House, just 5 years newer than the last one, built in 1925. No solar panels, some new siding and a new roof. So people are taking care of their homes, some new things inside. Very old gas boiler and cast iron radiators. Next slide. This house built 1936. So what was really interesting for me was kind of going from home to home, and it was kind of like going on a tour of houses, how houses changed over the centuries. And now all of a sudden you're going to see an attached garage, which you probably wouldn't see in a 1920 home. And of course, that attached garage, I don't think, no, it was not original, but it was built originally, and then they connected it. So also solar array. A couple of the houses had wood burning appliances. One had a wood fireplace, one had a wood stove, or 2 of them did. This one also had a solar array. Some insulation, new windows. This house had had a lot of work done over the years. Next slide. So 1938, I wouldn't have guessed that when I drove up to this one. An addition had been built. So a couple of changes made to this. But when the upgrades were made to this home, not much insulation or air sealing. That it didn't seem to pay attention to that. I don't think newer window, well, a couple of ages of windows. Next slide. And then the newest house, solar panels, wood stove, propane. It's not in town. Radiant heat, and I characterize this one as kind of good insulation plus no insulation. As the newest house, the part of the house that was built fairly conventionally was very well done in terms of insulation and air sealing. But part of the house was sort of a stacked timber, which meant that it was solid wood through and through. So I call that no insulation. Extremely excellent windows though on this house, triple glazed windows. Next slide. So what did the energy consumption of these houses look like? You're looking at a chart here that shows you the size of each house, the year it was built, and the very top we're giving you a reference point that we're calling a quote unquote average Minnesota house. This comes from information from the Energy Information Agency, a national government database that collects things. So the average Minnesota house in 2020 was about 2,000 square feet. These houses are sort of kind of right around average, the largest maybe being about 50% larger. The average Minnesota house consumed in 1 year a little over 100,000 kBTUs of energy and had something called an EUI. So an EUI is kind of an equalizer, that is an energy use intensity, and it's a simple mathematical equation where you take the total energy consumed and you divide it by the square foot per house. And so it kind of says, well, how much energy per square foot is this house consuming? So it's kind of a good frame of reference to take a look at. So the EUI of an average house in Minnesota is a little over 50 or 51. And again, you're seeing a range here with the houses that we looked at, where most of them, 3 out of 5, were above that number. So they're using more than average energy use intensity. And then 2 of them are less, but not a whole lot less. And to give you another point of reference in the red there, I do an awful lot of work in energy efficient homes, whether that's new homes or I'm doing deep retrofits and trying to reduce energy consumption. So I'm pretty familiar with EUI. And I would say that a low energy or an energy efficient home would have a site EUI generally somewhere between like 10 and 35, maybe as high as 40, but you know, not if you're in my office. So none of these houses, certainly not an average house, would qualify as sort of a low energy or an energy efficient home as is. Next slide, please. So what did we find? I'm not going to go into the details of the reports. And of course we had lots of things to say in the reports. Well, where are they using energy? How are they using energy? And I realized after I submitted these slides that there were a couple of data points that I didn't include, which I'll share with you now because I think they are meaningful. But 4 out of the 5 homes, so some of the things that we found that I think are really, really significant. No home had a furnace or a forced air distribution system. Every one of these 5 homes used what we call a hydronic system, so some kind of a boiler and radiators. And this is significant, as you will hear in a moment. I already told you none of these homes, as is, would be considered super energy efficient, despite the fact that they had solar panels. 3 of them had solar panels producing quite a bit of their electricity, and yet still their total energy consumption did not put them into the category of energy efficient as a whole. We found that. So, well, why not? The answer to that is pretty complex if you're looking at the houses one at a time, but there is one generalization that I can make, and that is that these houses were average compared to the state, what we call average in the state of Minnesota in this regard. Most homes in Minnesota use about 65 to 70% of the energy they consume every year just for heating. That's a big, big chunk. And these homes were no different as far as we could tell from analyzing the data. And so when such a large portion of your energy, the energy the house requires, is heating energy, if you are using, fossil fuel fired equipment, even higher efficiency equipment, you're probably using an awful lot of energy for heating. And if your house is inefficient, it requires a pretty steady stream of that fuel to keep you comfortable. And that was true of these homes. All had sort of insufficiencies, we would call them, in the enclosure that contribute to higher what we call heating loads. So I've kind of moved from, I don't remember what the last slide said. Sorry, if you can go back one. I guess we call that sort of findings to lessons. So let's go back. So next slide again to lessons. Yeah, thank you. So these findings lead to some lessons. And I think the lessons support this notion of process before product. One lesson is that having a process to assess is a really good idea. It lets us kind of really analyze where the house is, not just the mechanical systems, but the house as a whole. And what that way we can take that analysis into the next question of, well, what would it take to use heat pump technology, this super, super efficient, electrically powered technology. So an air source heat pump heating system might be 300% efficient, which is 3 times as efficient as the most efficient gas furnace. And I think Bret mentioned this. But there are limitations to the sizing of those air source heat pump systems. There are limitations to how big, let's say, if you're going to use an air system, how big the ducts would need to be to bring that heated air through the house if the enclosure is not efficient in itself. So houses without forced air heating systems may not be the best candidates for air source heat pump integration. Part of this is because the most promising technology right now is an air-to-air air source heat pump. And so that is going to deliver heat either with a ductless unit or a ducted system. If your house doesn't have any duct work, then we might be talking about a completely new additional system. What do we do with the old system of radiators? Possibly air-to-water heat pump technology. That was something that we learned to take a look at for one client. The other lesson is that an energy model is essential, and we didn't do an energy model for every house, but I will in the future. If you really want to dive into the back and forth of what could we do to the enclosure with air tightness and or insulation to reduce that heating load so that maybe we can bring in some of these few heat pump technologies, that would make sense. The other lesson, which we sort of learned along the way from conversations, and Bret had a lot of these, was that many local contractors remain skeptical or unfamiliar with these technologies for both space and water heating. So something that sounds like a good fit, both to the homeowner and to us as professionals, because we've seen it work over and over and over again. A lot of folks in our trades, contractors for plumbers and HVAC technicians, they're not quite in the same place yet. Next slide. Okay, that's you, Bret.
Thank you. Rachel, you do such a great job. Thank you. I learned something, even though I've worked with you on this project, I learned something every time you talk. I thought what we'd talk about here at the end are just some of the things that stood out to us. And Rachel, I'm going to invite you to pick a barrier that kind of surprised you or stood out to you in this project. It can be one of the things I mentioned here. It can be just something that you that is not on here, but was a barrier that you didn't anticipate or just stood out. So is there a barrier that kind of jumps out to you that you discovered in this project?
I think the barrier that I didn't anticipate was that it's complex. It had to do with the fact that none of the homes had forced air systems, which we didn't know going in. And that was compounded by the fact that 2 of the homes had very new heating equipment, which was tied to the water heating equipment. So it was I guess the way of putting that is the barrier was that the systems, the barrier wasn't the air source heat pump or even heat pump water heater technology. The barrier was the embedded systems that were present in the existing homes and the complexity of those mechanical systems. So the complexity wasn't in the new technology, it was in the existing conditions.
Yes, that surprised me too. And also the fact that some of those existing mechanical systems were still new. They may have been newly put in within the last few years, but they still could represent a barrier in some ways. So that I did not anticipate seeing. Yeah, I think I put some of the barriers here, or the next slide we'll get to in just a sec, or some of the bridges. I think you'll notice that some of the things that are barriers are also bridges. We'll have costs, we'll have contractors on both slides. Some of those I knew coming in. One of the things I found really interesting was the language, just the concept of how you communicate these ideas. I found what I thought one of the things I did was after the reports, I would come in and try to be a translator for the report, even though Rachel and her team had already talked to the homeowners during the visits and then wrote up the reports really well. Again, think about when you go to the doctor and then you get a big blood work detail. If you don't have a nurse to tell you what that all means, it can be very worrying just to have a bunch of numbers. You can think the worst. So I felt I did a lot of translation, which I think was helpful. And I think that was a barrier if we weren't providing those translation services. The other thing that was interesting about the language was that even some of the contractors didn't seem to understand some of the differences of what they were saying. For instance, we have one contractor that said, we only will do a set. Yes, we'll install a cold climate heat pump, but we'll only do a set point of 30 degrees, meaning that heat pump could operate down to 0. You're going to switch it over to natural gas at 30 degrees no matter what. And when I asked why, they said, because that's more efficient. Well, it's not more efficient energy-wise, but these contractors and many people over the last 20 years associate something that's cheaper with efficiency, right? And so having to, talk to a contractor like that, like, I think you mean it's going to be more cost effective? Is that what you're talking about? And so I think these are not barriers I anticipated. Next slide. But we found that interesting. I'll start with the bridges on this one. I think one of the ones that I was most surprised, maybe not surprised, I was most hopeful for was the fact that, again, contractors, I just mentioned some of the, the language in terms of a contractor understanding. There are also fantastic contractors out there, and there's a great work about helping contractors to have a basis of information that is good across the board, that they can go to get more information, and that they can then serve their their clients better. And the Minnesota Air Source Heat Pump Collaborative is a great example of that. If your contractor is within that, you can be kind of assured that they're doing continuing education on heat pumps, that they understand the possibilities and the drawbacks to those, and they can really help you out well. The other thing I thought that was really interesting is, as we did this project, new contractors came on the scene that were starting to offer kind of planning and management components, which was exciting because that was something I think Rachel and I both said, boy, these folks, they don't just need a consultant. These are complex things that they're trying to do to their home, and they could really use a project manager, which is what a commercial building has when they undertake something sophisticated like this. And some contractors were starting to offer these types of services, and I found that an exciting bridge to see. Rachel, was there anything that stood out sort of to you as a bridge? Sure.
It's not on this list. One of the things that stood out as a bridge was, and I think we'll come to it in sort of future implications, but I think it bears talking about it now because we didn't talk about some of the specific recommendations. And that is, there are components now using heat pump technology, and lots of folks are familiar with them. So something that many of us now call a mini split is in fact a ductless air source heat pump. So it's an extremely efficient small heat pump, but it's not a ducted system, and it can be large or small. There's an outdoor compressor, and there can be kind of a single unit in, let's say, a larger area of your house that's providing both heating and cooling. And it's not going to sort of provide heating and cooling down the hall and into the bedrooms with closed doors. But if you have a big open area in your house, that is, I think, a bridge technology if it's done well and sized right. And a heat pump water heater I think is also a bridge technology that when you decouple water heating from space heating, then we can talk just about using heat pump water heaters for water heating. And I think that we know enough about them now that it's pretty easy to put that in. And there are great rebates coming both for heat pump water heaters and for standalone ductless air source heat pumps. And so I think that's a bridge that maybe we're going to rely on more while we work out the kinks of trying to sort of fully integrate heating with air source heat pumps.
Rachel, we did have a question in the chat earlier specifically about hot water heat pumps. And I wonder if you could just explain a little bit more about that technology and kind of the usage of those units in the homes.
Sure.
Well,
Let me see. Can I find the question though? Is it?
I saw the question earlier. I think one thing we want to distinguish here is the difference between a heat pump water heater and an
I
air
see it.
water heat pump, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So I can answer that question very briefly now. We can talk, and it's going to also be in the future. Is that okay, Brett?
Yeah, let's go for it. Yeah.
So yeah, heat pumps able to energize. The question was, can you address heat pumps able to energize a hot water heating system? I hear they are not yet strong enough to do that, but are coming in a few years. Well, I would argue that they are strong enough to do that now, depending upon your heating load. So right now, so that's called an air to water heat pump, and it moves the heat from the air into sorry, I'm losing my words tonight. Eventually getting to a hydronic system, usually a system with a glycol solution though, so it's not necessarily just water. Not used for domestic water heating, but for space heating the same way that a boiler works. So like hydronic radiators or hydronic flooring. Now, first of all, air to water heat pump technology is going to work better if the distribution system is a low temp system. So the cast iron radiators of old homes that often rely on water heated to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, that is not a good trade-off for an air to water heat pump. You're much better off if you can be utilizing a system where the delivery emitters, let's call them, are between 90 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So your old cast iron radiators are not going to be that, but newer European radiators work for that, and so does in-floor heat. These technologies are here now. Can you just swap it in place of a boiler? Not necessarily. CEE, the Minnesota Center for Energy and the Environment, just completed a pretty deep study on adopting air to water heat pumps into existing homes, and you can find that information on their website. The bridge that I was talking about though was heat pump water heaters, where you're actually using an air to water heat pump to heat your domestic hot water, and none of the unit is outdoors. The whole unit is inside. And the one limitation of that is it's recommended that your heat pump water heater sit in a space that is no smaller than 700 cubic feet. So imagine a room that is, roughly 10 feet by 9 feet by 8 feet tall. And that's because it's utilizing the surrounding air. And it's cooling it to heat the water.
Thanks. Next slide. Oh, can you go back? I think you missed. There you go. Thanks. There were some surprises, and Rachel, I'll tap you again. I just put some of these things in here that you and I have talked about. I think anytime you do a study like this, you learn a ton. And I always feel a little guilty because I'm the one, I feel like, you're trying to educate the homeowner, but you're learning so much when you do this kind of thing. I think Rachel, I'll invite you to go, maybe something on this list, or if there's something that stood out and as something that really surprised you, if you want to share that, or otherwise I'm happy to go. I'm putting her on the spot. I didn't tell her I was going to do this.
You are, no, I think you kind of listed it. I'll let you go on that.
Sure. I think this kind of goes to the question that was actually in that you started to address just now and talking about heat pump water heaters. One thing that was really interesting was there had been a fear that you don't want to install a heat pump water heater in a house in Duluth or northern Minnesota because it's going to cool the house because it uses the interior air and it pulls the heat out of that into the water tank, and then it has a cooling effect. It basically puts cool air out of there while it does that. So, and that's really directly to the question, Don, that you kind of talked about. One of the things we found is one, it's very easy to model, and Rachel and her team provided a modeling platform about how much additional energy you're going to have to provide the home in heating to compensate for that, and so you can easily model that. But one thing that's it's important to look in your region and talk to people, as Rachel mentioned, because almost all of the folks had basements, and all of them that had basements had dehumidification issues. And I would argue almost anyone in Duluth that has a basement has a dehumidification issue because we live in a clay-like soil that's all a slow, basically underground river that's moving down towards a lake all the time. And so we live in a 6 months of the year, you really should be thinking about dehumidification. Most of the folks had dehumidifiers in their basements, and one of the things that heat pump water heater can do is provide dehumidification as it's cooling the room. So that and that's not something that we initially took out of our modeling. And that's not something that I don't think really has been looked at much in Minnesota about how much they can help dehumidify and then take out an electrical load that you're already using. So that was a surprise for me, and it was interesting finding, I thought. Kind of an unintended consequence. I think we need more study on that, to like how much dehumidification will it provide. But I think it was interesting to see particularly the one house that had installed that, there was a very significant cooling effect in the summer and dehumidification effects. So again, more to know, but that was a surprise.
Oops, I accidentally put the wrong thing in the chat. I got an overrule. I'm trying to put in the chat a link to mncee.org that does an awful lot of research on these things. And to go back into the chat, you did have a question that the person was referring to hot water for washing and bathing, not a hydronic system. And so Bret, you just started to talk about that. And I think that, and that's so double question. Yes, I think that heat pump water heaters can work very well, even far north here. And I know that they do, in fact. Do they pull heat out of the room and thus that room needs more heat? The answer is yes, but there have been studies done, multiple studies in cold climates, both here in Minnesota, but also in Vermont and in Massachusetts, that calculated the amount of heat that's being taken out and the amount of heat that you put back in. And generally, you're going to end up still better off with the heat pump water heater. You will still, as a whole, use less energy as a household.
Yeah. Thanks. Next slide. So one of the things we thought about were recommendations. In terms of when you do this project, what could be done to help folks understand these things better? I think anyone who really had an older home and really wants to dig into it deep should get this type of intensive assessment that Rachel conducted. So you could do that through Just Housing, and I think that's a great thing to do. One of the things I was trying to think about was in a recommendation. A lot of people might get an energy out in their home, which is a pretty it's a great thing. It's a foundational step towards electrifying and to trying to figure out if heat pumps are good for you. Were there some metrics? I didn't think anything that came up really hard. I think there were some generalizations we could make, and I put those on there. I think that one of the things that stood out to me as a recommendation, and again, I'm going to put Rachel on the spot and see what she would have as a recommendation, and then I'll learn along with you. But one of the things that is happening is you may hear of navigators, and these are people that are supposed to help you navigate as a homeowner all the incentives that are coming forward and figure out how to get those. I think Equilibrium 3, who provides energy audits in Duluth, is looking at having navigation. That's really critical. We know that people need assistance. You can't just give them a report. You have to help them out, understand the report, and then help them provide a pathway for them. I think what I learned in terms of this recommendation is the more you can assist them along that way, the more you can actually give them a pathway based on their own values and their own concerns, that then the more likely work is going to get done. And contractors need to be a part of that picture, both recommendations and places where people can go if they have contractor issues. So yeah, I think that was one of the recommendations that stood out for me in terms of my thoughts. Rachel, did you have anything that you know that kind of jumped out to you, or it could be anything I put here? Or...
Well, I would agree about the navigation. I would also agree that a comprehensive audit, and Bret said, provide a heating load estimate. Absolutely. It's just too common to go look and see the size of a boiler or a furnace and figure that when you want to replace that, let's say you just want to replace somebody's furnace with an air source heat pump, or you want to replace a boiler and the homeowner is willing to have an old outdated boiler and radiator system taken out and put in maybe a small ducted system, and you go and you look at that boiler. Most heating systems in Minnesota are oversized. They don't match the actual load of the house. And I know this because Minnesota Center for Energy and the Environment did a broad study on this. And I happen to be in the room with somebody today who quoted that study. So it's really fresh in my mind. And the sort of average heating load in even northern Minnesota, well, I don't know northern, the state as a whole, the average heating load is something like 47,000 BTUs an hour, which would be the size of a furnace that you would need. But the average heating equipment, especially in northern Minnesota, is probably 80,000 BTUs an hour. And so of input, we should say. And some of that's because we used to have really inefficient equipment. So you probably needed an 80,000 BTU an hour furnace or boiler to deliver 47,000 BTUs of heat. And so when the next guy came in to put in a more efficient furnace, rather than drop the size of the furnace, recognizing it was more efficient, they kept matching the size. You do that enough times, and you sort of forget where it started. So that would be a metric or a recommendation. Yes, to do an actual energy calculation so you know the load.
Yes, and then the homeowner is armed with that information as they talk to contractors. Say, hey, we got this information. This is our heating load. If you have a difference of opinion on that, tell us why, sort of, right? Next slide. Rachel, do you want to just speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, we were kind of talking about that just now.
Yeah.
So we made a slide about sort of what we took to be implications. So this was a study of 5. I'm actually involved in a little mini study right now of 2 homes in the central part of the state, and we're working with Slipstream.org, another nonprofit that's focused on decarbonization and electrification. And we took lessons from the Heat Pump Helpers study, thank you, Bret, right over to this study with 2 homes, and then we're going to take them even further. And so more detailed analysis is needed than sort of the utility style audits when you want to consider heat pump adoption for cold climate, especially when the houses don't have forced air furnaces, for sure. And I talked about this earlier about the sort of standalone ductless or ducted as a air conditioning system with supplemental heating capacity that operates independently of a gas-fired heating system. We looked at a house just recently where they're living in the basement and they're basically heating the basement with space heaters, and the furnace in this case just isn't matching the load of the house. And so thinking about a standalone ducted system for that basement seems like a really good, as you would say, Bret, bridge. And later, maybe the whole furnace would then be replaced with another one. I don't know the answer. And I guess the last thing that I want to say without reading everything, for future work, I think a more in-depth initial intake questionnaire and even an in-depth questionnaire and an in-person interview prior to doing a whole house audit to sort of screen what the household's goals and priorities and interest are versus the suitability of that home for this type of system. And the homeowner could potentially opt out of such a holistic assessment, kind of being told ahead of time, like you get a screening saying, you know, we're probably going to be recommending a lot more than just a replacement heating system. Do you want us to come in and do that deep of an assessment?
Thank you. Next slide. And I know we're at the end of the hour here. Rachel, do you have time for another 10 or 15 minutes so we could take some questions? Or
I do.
Okay, great. If folks can stay, great. We'll wrap up here and take your questions. Thanks for your patience. I knew getting together with Rachel, I always want to talk to her. So I'm sorry, it's always my fault. I want to get as much as I can out of Rachel when I talk to her, and I always delight in her company. So thank you very much. These are just some of the next steps that we're thinking about. I told you one of the things we were thinking about is, could we move this into a group buy process? We still think that's probably a little premature at this point. We really need a partner who's focused on that process. And on the solar side, we have a big partner with Solar United Neighbors who works people through the process, and we work on the outreach and education. I think what MNIPL can do, though, is continue to provide a support. So we certainly have regional groups. We try to have networks of relationships and trust across Northeastern Minnesota, both with organizations and with individuals, volunteers, members, and communities all over that region. And we could try to connect them to these great resources that we were starting to talk about. Electrify Everything is another campaign now put out by a great organization, CEE, that Rachel already talked about. And we can connect people. We don't have to be the expert. We can be the expert on experts and connect people. So that's what we're intending on doing, and educating people about the rebates. And hopefully we can work towards a sort of a heat pump group buy process in the future. Next slide. Yeah, I think we do have some questions at this point. And Rachel, there was one from Ryan, which is teed up exactly for you, I think. And it says, if perchance you were designing a new home from scratch, how would you design it to optimally utilize heat pumps? And I think you started to talk about this a little bit at the beginning, but maybe you want to talk, say a few more.
I did, and I actually wrote a one-line chat that you can answer in the chat. That's the easy part. The new homes are easy. And so we design a super energy efficient enclosure. We model it so that we know what the load is, and we design that enclosure knowing that we want to meet all of the energy needs with heat pump technology. And I do this, and I've done this over and over again for years. It's not that hard to do at all right now. And I sort of liken it to extra layers, same as we dress for our cold climate. So extra layer of insulation in the walls, in the roof, under the slab, on the foundation, on your windows as well. And super airtight mechanical ventilation. And then we can really optimize with small, super efficient systems. And we got a similar question with remodeling.
Got it. And I see there's a question. I can take the next question, which and I'll read it here for everyone. It is in the chat, and it's from Chris O'Brien. Chris is from up in Grand Marais. Great to have you on the call, Chris. And his question is the IRA funding for heat pump rebates through the Minnesota Department of Commerce vulnerable to being canceled under the new administration? Oh, the can of worms we can open with this. But let's dive into that, because that is an important question. I have been considering this along with many, many people across the country in terms of just exactly what kind of clawback the administration can take. One thing I found in terms of this particular question, there's a couple things we need to say. One is, what are the incentives? And the federal incentives right now for heat pumps there are tax credits available. Those tax credits were passed by Congress They are in federal law. To undo them, you would need an act of Congress to do that, and which is a high bar. And then, the best practice would be that anyone who's applying that credit in that year would get it, and the whatever changes to the code happens in the next year. So right now it looks like the tax credits are safe for 2025. We know this isn't quite a normal situation. There might be some things done abnormally in this situation, but people are feeling pretty safe about the credits. It does look like they want to come after credits, energy efficiency credits on the individual side. So no promises for 2026, but on 2025, those look strong. But I think what you were talking about, Chris, are the rebates. And this is a separate program where the federal government has said, hey, states in the United States, you want to stand up these rebate programs for low to moderate income folks or for whole home retrofits. Here's some money to do that. You administer those. And these are rebates, not tax credits, so that people can use those at point of sale. They can get quite a bit of money off, and we can really accelerate the deployment of these technologies. If you live in Wisconsin, the good news is this program's already up and running and you can take advantage of it. Minnesota is a little slow behind the ball on this. One thing, Chris, I have found out is the state has in hand, and that's a legal, that's my term from some legal things I'm not sure I understand, but they have half of the 150 million coming from the federal government for this. Half of it they have secured. The other half they're still trying to get desperately before the inauguration. So we'll wait and see, but we certainly have half of that money in hand, and the Department of Commerce still seems confident they can stand up the program by the spring of next year. So to be seen, but they seem to be working very, very hard to get that money.
And we are having a webinar tomorrow at 2 with Jeremy Kalin of Advise and Legal. I dropped the registration in the chat, and he may be able to speak to that question. I know that's not the main topic that he'll be addressing, but he might be able to speak to that.
Rachel, do you want to take the remodeling question that we have?
Sure. Yeah, I can take those too. So the remodeling plan for a heat pump when doubling the square footage from an original 1950 house. That's a great question. This is an ideal time to plan for a heat pump when you're going to do an addition that is that significant. And what I would urge is that if you're already kind of embarking on this or thinking about it, is to have an energy calculation done. Of both the existing and the addition together. What is the load going to be? So it's math. But the other thing is that, and that might lead you to making some decisions that you might not have initially made about how you build that addition, so that it's as energy efficient as it can be to drop, again, that load so that maybe one new system can heat the whole house, or maybe you end up with a dual fuel system. I don't know what the original system is on the 1950 house. A lot of houses from the 1950s had forced air. But in any case, this is where energy modeling is so worth it. Even if you pay $500 for an energy model, and it could be more depending upon how complex and how many variations you want to see, but that is going to be money saved by not overspending on mechanicals, or not making a mistake of building something that's essentially not just obsolete, but uncomfortable and really expensive to heat and cool, depending upon where you are. And the high efficiency home heated with a propane fired in-floor heat. Now, in-floor heat, that's the key, because that's a low temperature system. You've heard of a Canadian air to water heat pump that can be installed kind of in parallel. That's a type of dual fuel system. Absolutely. So the manufacturer of such systems, Arctic Heat is one of them. There are several companies now with these on the market, where most of the air to water heat pump companies that I'm aware of, and Bret, you probably know more about this at this point, have in-house technicians that can help answer these questions, and it can absolutely be explored. I don't know where you're located, if you're sort of up here in the Northland or more toward the Twin Cities. If you're more toward the Twin Cities, there are even more builders who are familiar, contractors, I should say, usually a plumber, with putting in this technology. And my perspective on this system is that they seem to work. And like anything, when you're adding a little bit of complexity, you want to work with technical assistance that is sound and you want to work with a plumber and or HVAC technician who is really interested in the technology because they want to see it succeed as well.
Thank you. And it was great that not great. One of our homeowners was really challenged because their propane heat distribution system conked out. Luckily after the winter of last year, but they needed to replace it, and they replaced it with an air-to-water heat pump. And I don't know if it's installed yet or not. They're hoping to get it installed by Thanksgiving, but they were in a very similar situation, and they did have a lot of great assistance, in this case from Arctic, I think, to help, find folks to actually get that installed. I think the drawback is we don't, at least in northern Minnesota, we don't have contractor networks exactly set up yet. You have to kind of source that on your own a bit. Yeah. There's a question here about who do you ask for energy calculation in Grand Marais? Original system is a floor furnace. Well, Rachel, do you want to take that? Or
I was going to say, I don't know the answer to that unless you do, Bret, but I know a database where you can search.
Right. Why don't you talk about that, and then I'll say the source that I know after you mentioned.
Okay. So if someone is a professional with a certification from the Building Performance Institute, not any certification, but there's certain levels of certification where it basically means they know how to do an energy calculation, and they should be listed through as a contractor through BPI, the Building Performance Institute. That is one way of finding.
Yeah, and Chris beat me to my answer. My answer was, if you live in Grand Marais, you've got a great resource called CERT, Cook County Local Energy Project, that can help you source that kind of stuff. And Chris is on the call here tonight, so he responded in the chat and encourage you to look them up. They're a great partner. Thank you for all you do, CERT. A few other questions here. Yep, Beverly. Thank you for mentioning the nonprofit in Grand Marais for energy efficiency. We're just going to give more kudos to CERT, I believe, is what you're talking about there. Okay, is there an online tool for calculating energy intensity for your home?
I am sure there is. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I will find out. And so, Bret, I don't know if my contact information was going to be on the slides. I don't know if it is. I'm just going to drop it in. If you want to send me an email, I will find it. Because that's something I should put on our website as well.
And if you send it to Buff and myself afterwards, we'll make sure in the follow-up, to this, we'll put that information in there too, Rachel.
But you can, if you really feel like playing with some math, you need to know your total energy consumption, not just your electric bill. If you're using propane or you're using natural gas, and then you have to convert it all to the same kind of unit. And we can do that. You can convert energy units. We should probably just do it up on our website. Maybe we'll make one. Before long, we'll try to have an online calculate your EOI tool on the Just Housing website, because we do this in-house anyway. We've got the spreadsheet. So you convert it, and then all you do is you take the total. We do it in kBTUs. So that's kilo BTUs. And you divide by the square footage of your house. That's total square footage of conditioned space. Even if you're not living in the basement, if the basement is effectively heated because it's, your boiler is down there, you have to add that in as well. But we can write that'll be a fun thing. I mean, it'll probably take us a month or so, but maybe we'll try to do it as a New Year's present for people. Yeah.
My only caution to you is that then you start thinking in those terms and it's game over. Rachel has me thinking in energy flows all the time, and yeah, my wife can't stand it. So that's all right. Our marriage is going to survive here, and we'll all be better for that. But yeah, really encourage you to think about energy in a deep way. A unit of energy is a gallon of gas. A unit of energy is a CCF of natural gas. A unit of energy is also a kilowatt hour. How do you compare all those things? And that's kind of what you do when you start throwing these energy modeling things together and comparing those. It's pretty fun. I think that might be it for our questions right now. Thanks everyone who is contributing online I want to also say a special thanks to the homeowners that participated in this project. Some of them are on the call tonight. They did not, I did not call on them to present. And if we had a few more minutes, I'd let them kind of tell you their experience. But they were just great and very generous with their time in this project. And that really made this project a joy to get to know those folks. Rachel, do you have any parting thoughts here?
I thank you all for joining. This is what makes sort of, getting up every morning worth it to me, being part of a community like this. And also want to just give a huge, huge thank you to you, Bret. You are such a treasure in our community. You speak so many different languages well. And it's a rare person that can sort of connect with community members the way that you do, and also be able to share all the things that you know in such a deep way about energy. So I'm always grateful to you.
Now I'm going to speak the language of embarrassment. Thank you for that. And thank you all for attending tonight. I believe we'll be posting, Buff, correct, that we'll be sending the video out on this. And then we post it to our website as well, perhaps, or?
Yeah, we'll definitely include it in the email, and we'll talk to our communications person, Sam, about the website. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you all.
Good night.